I know you don't usually start your camera.
How is everyone on this sunny evening in May? Glad to see some new faces with us.
I'll signal you when I'm done. Okay?
I am Marcy Fessler, President of the First Friday Club Board. In the name of our officers, board members, and committees, I welcome you to our special dinner program of our 20th anniversary season. Truly, though, I am so grateful to everyone who is here, and I am grateful to everyone who continues to support First Friday Club. You and your parishes make it possible for us to continue to plan and continue into a third decade of speakers and luncheons and dinners. Little spoiler alert for next season. We're going to have a nice little dinner series. And that's all I'm saying. So, a couple quick reminders. Now's the time. Check your phones. Check your watches. Make sure everything is silenced. I didn't get to ask Dr. Schmalz, but will you dance if a ringtone is good? Okay, there we go. Maybe I shouldn't have asked that one. Sue, maybe we'll put mine back on. If anyone needs religious education certification hours, there was a form at our welcome table to sign. Be sure to like us on Facebook and check there for changes or updates. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, or you didn't know that we have a YouTube channel, you need to do that, because we have one, and that's where we put all of our videos now with links from our website. So be sure to check out YouTube. Next month, we gather for our regular luncheon presentation on June 4th to hear David Gibson, and he will speak on the American Pope, the American Church, and what Leo XIV means for U.S. Catholicism. Make note, reservations are due 1 week before the luncheon. Please join me in thanking Joe and Mary Ellen Brannigan for sponsoring Dr. Schmalz this evening. Thank you very much. Dr. Schmalz, you will entertain questions? You will entertain questions. There we go. So let's take a moment, bow our heads, remembering our presenter, all who have gathered here in this room, those who are unable to join us this evening, and all the prayers that we hold in our hearts. In a spirit of praise and thanks, God, our Creator, you sustain our lives through the gift of your Spirit and in the following of Jesus. Stir in us the desire to learn, to love, to serve more generously, to act on behalf of justice and truth. We ask these blessings in your holy name. Amen. I invite Mary Ellen to come up.
Hi everyone, thanks again for coming. I want to do a little teaser for our next year season program, which will start in September. We're going to start the season off with Judge Jack Durkin coming to talk to us. I think many of you probably know Judge Durkin. He does the drug court downtown, but I don't think he's going to talk about that. But he's a Cardinal Mooney grad, and a lot of us know him. We are having a woman, her name is Denise Utter, which will say, who's that? She's a woman from Chicago. She is an Augustinian associate who just happened to work with Robert Protos there. She knows him personally. She was in Rome after the conclave, has lots of pictures, a slideshow, lots of personal stories, and was there for all of his initial work. And she speaks a lot, so she's a very good speaker in addition to having great knowledge. We are introducing, I guess, our dinner series. Many of you say, why am I here at dinner? This is a luncheon program. And the reason is, a lot of people tell us they want to come, but they work, and they can't get here during our lunchtime. So to try to accommodate them, we're going to do a dinner series. It's going to be during daylight hours, so no one has to worry about driving home in the dark. We are going to have a gentleman in May. His name is Christopher White. He is an analyst for MSNBC and NBC for the Vatican. I think maybe he might be kind of replacing John Allen. I'm not really sure, because he also works for Crux, his magazine. And we're going to have Father Ed Noga. He's coming for one of our evening programs. And he's bringing Jim Johnson with him, so there's going to be a little guitar music involved. Then in July, Bishop Keener has agreed to come and talk to us. So he's coming back from Iowa. Keep him in your prayers, though. He has just had major reconstructive foot surgery. He's doing well, but he has minimal mobility right now. But he is going to come. And then we're going to close out our speaker evening series with Jerry Raschuti. Most of you know him from Channel 27. He did leave that position, though, and he is working as a public information officer for the prosecutor's office and the sheriff's office. So we do still have a couple of open spots we're trying to book. We do try to accommodate any requests that you have. So if you know of someone that you would think would be a wonderful speaker for us, contact either myself. I think most of you know Ray Novotny. He's one of our programming people. And Ann Kravitz is also another programming person. So please give us names and we'll try to accommodate those requests. Or if you have a topic you want us to talk about, we'll try to find a speaker that is knowledgeable on that topic and bring them to you so that you're entertained. And now, on to my formal welcome and introduction. Mathew Schmalz is a writer, has authored over 100 articles, essays, and books. He regularly contributes to media coverage for religion issues in Newsweek, The Washington Post, Commonweal, National Catholic Reporter, and he is the founding editor of the Journal of Global Catholicism. If any of you read USA Today, he was quoted in USA Today just a couple weeks ago. He is an educator. He's called Professor Matt by his students. He has taught religious studies at the College of Holy Cross, a Jesuit liberal arts college in Worcester, Massachusetts, for the past 26 years. Prior to that, he lived for 4 years in India as a student and researcher, and was trained as a historian of religion at the University of Chicago. He is a grateful husband to Kristen, and they have 2 college-age daughters, Anna and Katie. Other members of his family are a pot-bellied pig named Half Pint and an Appaloosa horse named Hollywood. Please join me in welcoming Matt Schmalz.
It is true that I have a pot-bellied pig. I know it's crazy, but it's the life that I lead. So it's really wonderful to be here this evening, and I want to thank you all for inviting me and giving me your kind and patient attention. I've actually never been to Youngstown before, so it's great to be here and to be welcomed so heartily and sincerely. And I would also like to extend my special thanks to Mr. Ray Novotny, who has been showing me around very graciously with a lot of information, not only about the town, but about all of you. And also, he has distinguished himself, in my view, as probably the most organized person I've ever met. So I am very, very grateful, and we've struck up a really nice friendship. So it's really wonderful to be with you this evening. So in the 30 to 40 minutes during which I will speak, I'd obviously like to focus on what the title indicates, Global Catholicism and the Pope. And as Mary Ellen mentioned in her very gracious introduction, global Catholicism is one of my areas of expertise, and I lived for India as a student and researcher for 4 years, and my main area of focus was on Catholic converts to Catholicism, and I'll introduce you to some of that this evening. And I also started the Journal of Global Catholicism, and am presently working on a 60-chapter book called The Catholic World that examines Catholicism worldwide. So I'd like to emphasize, and I think what's really important for us all to appreciate and understand, is that Catholics are part of a global church, and that the ties that bind us together aren't just the very important ties of community where we live, but ties that connect us to people around the globe. And that's one of the real gifts, I think, that Catholicism has given the world, which is this unity in diversity. So what I'd like to first do is comment on the election of Pope Leo and what it means, at least in my humble opinion. And then I'd like to move to discussing his priorities. And then we'll go on a world tour, a very brief one, and consider issues concerning the Catholic Church globally, focusing on Africa first, then Latin America, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and finally the United States. And this tour will necessarily be very broad and somewhat superficial, but I hope it gives us all a sense of the issues that Pope Leo will confront as his papacy moves forward. So back on April 21st of last year, I got up really early, and I'm a night owl, so this is really early for me. Got up at about 5 a.m. and I had to finish something that was really important but really difficult for me, which was taking minutes for faculty meetings. And I'm not a detail guy, so it was really challenging for me. So I opened my computer and began to work, but I was caught off guard by an email notification from a Boston TV station asking me to talk about Pope Francis. And it was then that I learned that the Holy Father had passed away. And that began a long series of interviews, about 75 over the next couple of weeks. And in these interviews, I was asked one question consistently, each and every interview: will we see an American-born Pope? And my answer was also consistent: no way. My thought was that American cardinals were so engaged in the culture wars that it would be difficult to choose an American without baggage and battle scars. And also I surmise that the Vatican may not wish to seemingly align itself with a superpower like the United States. So when an American and a Chicago White Sox fan was elected to the papacy, I think an appropriate heading for my media commentary should have been "Global Catholicism expert gets it wrong." So that's the way it goes. But I was very happy to be wrong in this case. And in some ways, at least looking back at things in retrospect, I shouldn't have been surprised, since Robert Prevost, now Leo XIV, was not your typical American prelate. First, he's an Augustinian, an order known for poverty, civility, and solidarity with the poor. And Pope Leo was also a graduate of Villanova University, as I'm sure all of you know, an Augustinian institution and longtime football rival of the College of the Holy Cross, where I teach. But we've all forgiven Pope Leo for that. Robert Prevost also, as you know, was a missionary in Peru, and so he brings a background that is familiar with issues important in the global South. And I think that was really important for his election and something that we'll talk about further. Additionally, in what I think is an important and often overlooked detail in his background is that he was trained in canon law. And I think that made him more acceptable to more traditionally or conservatively inclined members of the College of Cardinals. So choosing Robert Prevost as Pope makes a great deal of sense for a church if the goal is continuing the reforms of Pope Francis, while also giving the Catholic world a chance to catch its breath from a pontificate that really deeply impacted church governance and the lives of individual Catholics around the world. And so in choosing the name Leo, a name which I'm sure many of you know means lion, Robert Prevost was clearly honoring his distant predecessor, Leo XIII. And Leo XIII's papacy was long and significant. He reigned for 25 years from 1878 to 1903 and passed away at the ripe old age of 93. And Pope Leo XIII was most famous for his encyclical papal letter Rerum Novarum, or Of New Things. And Rerum Novarum, as I think many of you know, was a landmark in Catholic social teaching that addressed workers' rights, among other subjects, and specifically advocated for fair wages and the dignity of labor. And so, in continuity with the intent behind Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIV has already begun to address quote-unquote new things which affect workers and have transformed labor in a rapidly changing digital age. And of particular concern for this new American Pope, and we'll talk about this a little more in the conclusion of my remarks, is how artificial intelligence, or AI, threatens to devalue and displace human labor. And along with this, Pope Leo has emphasized Catholicism's preferential option for the poor and has carried through Pope Francis's concerns about global warming and environmental degradation. And the new Pope has also welcomed synodality and its more inclusive vision of decision-making in the church. And so all of this strikes me as continuing the legacy of Pope Francis in a consistent way. Where Pope Leo has surprised me, however, is with his increasingly specific comments about the situation regarding immigrants and migrants in the United States. And Pope Francis, as all of you know, was certainly concerned with the treatment of migrants, especially in Europe. And so Pope Leo's echoing of this concern is not in and of itself surprising. But what has struck me is that Pope Leo has gone further to address the situation in the United States and policies in the Trump administration. And so while Pope Leo, at least a few months ago, was dubbed the quiet American, at least in some quarters, it may very well be the case that he will become more outspoken about pressing issues as he understands them in his own country. And if that turns out to be true, we'll see another significant pontificate with unexpected impacts on Catholics and the world as a whole. So let's now turn to the Catholic world. And the way I will organize this part of the presentation is first to talk about general issues in each geographical area, and then reflect on how Pope Leo might address them. Okay, so let's turn first to Africa. And Africa, as many of you surely know, represents the fastest growing geographical area for the Catholic Church worldwide. The number of Catholics in Africa has increased from under 1 million in the year 1910 to over 288 million in 2024. And the Catholic population, as you can see here, is concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa, and by numbers in any case and percentages, the most Catholic countries in the continent are the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, then Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Now, in my field of religious studies, Catholicism in Africa is most usually studied in relation to colonial rule, especially by Belgium in the Congo or French colonialism in other parts of Africa. but it's really important to emphasize that Africa is home to an indigenous Catholic Church that has very deep African roots. For example, there is specifically an African rite, the Zairian rite, that was specially approved by the Vatican, which integrates indigenous African elements such as drumming, rhythmic song, and dance. And there's also the prevalence of the Catholic charismatic movement, which focuses on healing and often combines that with indigenous African practices or modes of healing. So there's a lot more going on with Catholicism in Africa than simply considering it a colonialist imposition. And so in terms of Catholicism, there are three issues that I would like to highlight. The first is the relationship with Islam. And this is especially important in Nigeria, where we do see, I think it is fair and accurate to say, real persecution of Christians, meaning murder and kidnapping, at the hands of Islamist groups, who certainly don't represent all Muslims, and I want to make that very, very clear, but nonetheless are a real force within Nigeria challenging the stability of the country. And so for Pope Leo then, one of the issues is the possibility of interreligious cooperation in which Muslims and Christians can join together in various social initiatives while still retaining their distinctiveness with regard to beliefs, particularly differences when it comes to understanding the personhood of Jesus Christ, for example. The second major issue is polygamy. And polygamy is legal in many African countries, and there are a large number of polygamous families who are Catholic. And polygamous marriage is explicitly forbidden in the Catholic Catechism, but a good number of African priests and bishops, at least ones that I know, have argued that polygamous families should have access to the sacraments. And it's also important to mention that African bishops have been most vociferous in their opposition to any relaxation of church discipline or doctrine in relation to gay, lesbian, and trans Catholics, including the blessings of those in same-sex relationships. And so these kinds of differences are very, very difficult for a pontiff like Leo to navigate, given different kinds of cultural sensibilities. The final issue is income inequality and its relationship to migration both within and outside the African continent. And so this was a particular issue in Pope Leo's recent visit to Africa, where he went to two nations in particular, Angola and Equatorial Guinea, which have been struck by really wide income inequality, even though both countries do have resources to treat the population more equitably. And so he drew, Pope Leo did, attention to an economy that, in his words, kills, both because of wealth inequality, but also because of corruption. And when he was in Algeria, Pope Leo accompanied the imam or leader of the Great Mosque of Algiers, and this was really a watershed moment. But reports vary. It was really interesting to see how these reports vary about whether or not Pope Leo and the imam actually prayed together. Initial reports said that they did. Then later reports said that Leo didn't feel that this was the appropriate opportunity or context for a prayer together. And he certainly didn't pray with the imam or leader of the Blue Mosque in Istanbul when he went there. So there's an interesting sense with Leo about being open to dialogue, being open to difference, but also respecting those differences within particular contexts. Nonetheless, Pope Leo's call was very clear that Muslims and Christians can join together not only to build a better society within the specific countries in which they live, but also join together to build a better world. With regard to polygamy, in November 2025, the Vatican promulgated a document called One Flesh in Praise of Monogamy that explicitly condemned polygamy while also admitting that it was a real pastoral challenge. And so, the challenge of approaching, engaging, integrating polygamous families is something that's very real and needs to be approached with a great deal of pastoral sensitivity. And at least in my experience, there has been a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy with regard to acknowledging Catholic families in polygamous unions. And the question is, how to balance that with the demands of church doctrine and discipline. And so I'd like to then move to Latin America. And of course, Robert Prevost, before he became Leo XIV, spent over 2 decades in Peru as a missionary, teacher, and of course, bishop. And in Latin America, as I'm sure many of you know, there are many real issues facing the Catholic Church. And as you can see here, while the continent is still majority Catholic, there really has been a rise in evangelical Protestant communities and also Pentecostal Protestant communities that have drawn away many Catholics. And in addition to this, there is, interestingly enough, a rise of secularism, especially in the younger generation, who claim no particular religious affiliation. Also, too, in certain contexts, there's a lingering tension, one might say, between liberation theologians, those who feel as though the Catholic Church should be really socially and politically conscious, and those who are Catholic traditionalists, who are more inclined to try to reclaim Catholic traditions of the past and re-emphasize them in a world that really needs a distinctive sense of Catholic identity. So I think that Pope Leo's Latin American sensibilities are best expressed and come through most clearly in his apostolic exhortation, Delixit Te, or I have loved you, which explicitly continues Pope Francis's reflections in Delexi Nos. Delexit Te's main focus is the conditions facing the poor. And in criticizing the pursuit of quote-unquote wealth at all costs, Leo argues for a cultural change that removes the social and economic aspects of poverty. And so in making this argument, Leo identifies, and I think this is a really powerful vision, Jesus as the poor Messiah, who has a special love for those rejected by the world. And for Leo, as for all of us Christians, the poor have dignity precisely because they show society the face of Jesus. And so I think, too, that Pope Leo's experience as a missionary will make him sensitive and responsive to the societal changes that Latin America is undergoing. And one of the appeals of evangelical Christianity and also Pentecostalism to disaffected Catholics is that both these communities bring a closer sense of togetherness than often traditional Catholic parishes do. And so in some ways, even in Latin America, the Catholic Church might need to regain some of its missionary spirit in order to reach out to those who feel as though the Church does not know or does not want to know about them. So I'd like to turn next to Asia. There we go. And we'll go to India in just a sec. Okay. There we go. Oh, okay, sorry about that. You know, in interest of true confessions, it was only until I was about 10 years old that I learned how to tie my shoes, because I don't have the manual dexterity that someone should have. When I was fitted for my wedding ring, the jeweler said, "My gosh, you have stubby fingers." And so I think it was my stubby fingers that was messing things up. Thanks for your patience. And so I'd like to take us to Asia now, and especially in a few moments to India. And I'd like to address 3 particular areas of concern that Pope Leo might have to deal with. So the first issue, or the first area, is China. And as some of you may know, there are actually two Catholic churches in China. One is the church that's officially sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party, and so the party chooses a bishop, which is then approved by the Pope. Then there's the underground church that sees itself as the bearer of true Catholicity and sees itself as loyal to the Vatican. And so, in spite of the accord between the Chinese government and the Vatican, which has been in place since 2018, repression is still quite intense, especially as related to the underground church. And so the Vatican's accord with the Chinese government has also drawn criticism, especially from Catholic traditionalists who believe that this is the church essentially buckling under to a secular power. And so it seems to me that Pope Leo will have to move delicately, but with the persecution of Catholics continuing and perhaps even increasing, he might have to become more assertive in emphasizing freedom of worship issues. I also want to take you to this country right down here. Okay? This is East Timor, which by percentages is one of the most Catholic countries in the world. 95% of the population is Catholic. And some of you may know East Timor gained its independence after a particularly brutal persecution by the Indonesian government, and now is undergoing a very, very divisive sexual abuse crisis of its own that is connected with what was, or who was, a highly regarded American priest. And so this shows that the sexual abuse scandal is something that has international ramifications. And Pope Leo has advocated for a zero-tolerance policy in relation to perpetrators of sexual abuse, and stated that charges of sexual abuse should not be covered up. Nonetheless, as the sexual abuse crisis continues to include disclosures from beyond the Western world, it remains to be seen to what extent any kind of universal rubric for coming from the Vatican can be applied in different cultural contexts. And so in relation then, particularly to the issue of persecution, I'd also like to mention the situation in India, where I lived for 4 years. And Pope Francis, there we go, okay. So I'm going to take you to India, and I'm going to take you to this part of India right up here in north, okay? And Pope Francis was particularly keen in some of his public statements and those in the bishops that he appointed on integrating a segment of the Catholic population called Dalits. Dalit is a word that means crushed or oppressed, and this is a term that refers to India's former untouchables. And Pope Francis really did great work in bringing Dalit bishops into the church hierarchy. And so here I'd like to delve into some of the more specific issues surrounding global Catholicism as I have studied it. And I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite people of all time. This is Kamala, and she passed away several years ago, but her experiences, which I'd like to share with you very briefly, highlight what I think are the challenges and opportunities for the Catholic Church in India, especially as Pope Leo emphasizes care for the poor. And so if you see Kamala, she had led a very, very tough life. When this picture was taken, I took it about 20 years ago. She's younger than I am now, so she's around 50. Her life was shaped by hard manual labor in the fields. And she has tattoos on her arm, which maybe you can see, that protect her from evil forces. And she was also an exorcist before she converted to Catholicism. And it's interesting that her role as exorcist continued after she became Catholic in the Catholic Charismatic movement. And so, just to give you a sense of the diversity of global Catholicism, let's take a look at the mission where Kamala goes to Mass. This is where she lives with her family. These aren't what are called solid houses. They're houses built of thatch and wood and leaves, and they're in a segregated part of the village because as Dalits, Kamala and her family are considered to be so polluted that they can't be touched, hence the name Untouchable. Here's the local mission church, and for some reason that I've yet to figure out after all my years in India, all church buildings in the North India are painted red. So that's a real marker of what it is to be Catholic. You can see kind of a crooked star. It was after Christmas that I took this picture. There's also a fountain where people wash their feet because you attend Mass barefoot. There's the priest celebrating priest according to an altered form of the Latin rite designed for local indigenous populations. They also have a boarding school. Kamala herself was illiterate, but many in her following generation were the first Dalits who were taught in the Catholic mission school and became literate because they wouldn't be allowed in government schools, even though legally they would supposedly be, but because they were untouchables, they were excluded. Most significantly, or at least in addition to the boarding school, there's also a medical dispensary. And here are some boarders at the school looking very happy, but kind of shy when I took their picture. And so what's important to understand is that the Catholic Church in many locations, not only in India, but throughout the world, is really the only organization that's providing consistent health care and education for many of the world's poorest. And that's something as Catholics I think we can be really proud of, even if we recognize that our church is not perfect and can improve in many ways. And certainly within the North Indian context, where Catholics are a very small minority, you can see a real impact of church work. Here's another shrine, shrine to the Sacred Heart. Here is the top of the shrine where it says in Hindi, Mehu Swarat Satya or Jivan, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Here's where the nuns live, and it says in Hindi, Tume Shanti Mile, may you have peace. And the nuns run the medical dispensary and do most of the education at the boarding. Here's the priest along with his parishioners, younger parishioners. The mission also has its own water buffaloes that provide milk and also energy through their dung for the mission itself. And the kids kind of like playing around with them. And here's looking away from the mission to the village. And you can see Catholic homes. Here's one Catholic home. Again, not built of brick or mortar. Here's a more well-developed, quote-unquote, Catholic home with a cross on it, demonstrating a distinctive identity. Photos of the Blessed Mother, pictures of the Blessed Mother. And this is interesting. This is the traditional way of welcoming priests, the washing of the feet, which is something that obviously recalls Jesus and his disciples. And what's also too important here is that shrines, particularly like the shrine to Mother Mary here, have their own indigenous Indian feel, and also Hindus very often go to worship there as well. So here you see the shrine, and then Mary housed in the shrine, and this is locally a place of worship and reverence. So let me finish up about Kamla before we move on. Kamla was born into the Chamar caste of tanners, meaning that she and her family their caste duty was to remove the carcasses of dead animals and tan the hide. And she lived in a segregated section of the village, which I showed you, surrounded by wheat fields. And so when she was younger, when the Catholic mission was first established, it was the only place you could go for medical treatment for like 100 miles around. And so her son, a really wonderful man named Prabhunath, who I was friends with, was on the brink of death. And so she brought him to the dispensary where he was healed. And in Kamala's view, it was because of the intercession of the Blessed Mother Mary. And so she converted to Catholicism. But because she was untouchable, she could not be touched by members of the higher castes. And so what she would do, her only occupation was either to be a midwife, because she would accept the pollution of birth, or to do manual labor in the fields. And for manual labor in the fields, you weren't paid cash or anything like that. You'd gather 16 bundles of wheat, and then you'd get one bundle in return. And so becoming Christian did give Kamla a new sense of identity, though it did not, in the minds of many Hindus, remove the stain of untouchability. But she took her Catholicity very, very seriously. And I remember her walking literally miles, barefoot on Sundays to go to Mass, and she'd always go to confession before receiving the Eucharist. And so the reason I bring her to your attention, or to our attention, is that when we talk about global Catholicism, it's easy to talk in very general terms about demographics or broad themes, but Kamala's experience, it seems to me, does speak to what Pope Leo is emphasizing when he talks about the dignity of the poor and the outcast and how they show us Jesus. And so, while my remarks have been very general, I wanted to give you a sense, at least from my experience, of what I've learned about global Catholicism, and at least one particular story that highlights some of the themes that Pope Leo wants to identify. And so in India, the church is now continuing to face renewed violence and expulsion of missionaries under the Hindu nationalist government. And so while India is an increasingly important area in the global church, with about 20 million Catholics, Catholics themselves, even though they do much to help the Indian nation, are often considered suspect and with divided loyalties. And so it's here that Pope Leo's condemnation of nationalism is important. Pope Leo has consistently criticized modern political versions of nationalism, arguing that it creates a quote-unquote exclusionary mindset that tramples on the rights of the weakest and builds, in his words, walls of indifference and fuels conflict. And so in relation to this, Pope Leo has urged for open borders, global unity, and dialogue. And so in this sense, India is a very important test case for Catholicism's opposition to virulent forms of nationalism which seek to exclude and create divisions and boundaries between people. And so moving next to the Middle East, I think many of us are aware of Pope Leo's opposition to the Iran and Iraq war, which he says needs to be resolved through dialogue. And his most fundamental point seems to be that modern war is so destructive that traditional Catholic doctrinal frameworks, such as just war theory, are outdated and not necessarily applicable in the way in which they once were. And I think this, I think, would be the Pope's position vis-a-vis U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance's comments, which were very critical, saying that the Pope Leo wasn't applying just war theory to the Iran war in a very comprehensive way. And as all of us, I'm sure, are aware, Pope Leo's opposition to the war in Iran has also drawn the ire of President Trump, who has stated that the Pope is, quote-unquote, terrible on foreign policy and supposedly has no problem with Iran developing a nuclear weapon. And Pope Leo has addressed such charges pretty explicitly, recently affirming the Catholic Church's opposition to nuclear weapons and calling for a more truthful approach to discussing such matters in the future. And so I think it's clear that Leo's concern with peace is rapidly becoming a hallmark of his pontificate. And he's also condemned the collective punishment and displacement inflicted upon Palestinians in the wake of the October 7, 2023 attacks. And it should also be noted, as displayed here, that the Middle East is home to a number of Eastern Catholic churches in full communion with Rome. And in his recent visit to Lebanon, for example, Pope Leo especially acknowledged the struggles of the Maronite and Melkite churches, particularly with Israeli incursions into southern Lebanon. And so I'd like to conclude by some general remarks about Europe and the U.S. And as I'm sure all of you know, Europe has experienced waves of secularization. And in response, there seem to have been two basic ways of handling things. One has been to adapt to changing circumstances and make the church more accessible, especially to younger people. The other approach has been to renew allegiance to a pre-conciliar, pre-Vatican II church, and both have been playing out in recent months. Pope Francis began what is called the synodal way, that involves lay people in more substantive roles in decision-making within the church. And Pope Leo, in his very first speech after his election, affirmed the growth of a synodal church. So this particular reform of Pope Francis is definitely here to stay. And in no country has this synodal way been more controversial than in Germany. The German synodal way, a multi-year reform process inaugurated in 2019, was meant to address clerical sexual abuse and other systemic church issues. And it focused on four key areas: power, the priesthood, women's roles, and sexual morality. And so most recently, German bishops, such as Reinhold Marx here, have affirmed blessing those in same-sex couples, a move that the Vatican has stopped with the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith, warning German bishops to halt efforts in that direction, stating that such practices risk, quote-unquote, legitimizing unions contrary to Catholic doctrine. So in this sense, while Leo is supportive of a more lay-centered church, there still are limits. And these limits also apply to Catholic traditionalists. So here you see on the opposite side, the head of the schismatic group, the Society of St. Pius X, that was once led by French Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, that rejected the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, particularly the Mass and the vernacular, and pronouncements on religious freedom. So the Society of St. Pius X, now led by Bernard File, pictured there, has recently signaled its intent to consecrate bishops. And this undoubtedly would be a schismatic act that would necessitate a response by the Vatican. So it'll be interesting to see whether Pope Leo will follow through with excommunication, and I think he probably will. This brings us then to the United States, where Pope Leo was born. There we go. And as mentioned earlier, I was surprised by Leo's election. I thought that a typical American cardinal would have been so marked by the culture wars, as I said before, that he wouldn't be seen as a suitable candidate. But what we've seen, particularly in recent decades, is that Catholicism's center of gravity is moving toward the global south. So I think Pope Leo represents a bridge between the global north and the global south in a particularly striking way. And I also think that despite what has been reported, Robert Prevost was elected precisely as a counterweight to President Trump. I do think that. And in any case, what we can see is there's a definite distinction between the two worldviews of the two leaders, and one that reflects divisions, and I would say painful divisions, within American Catholicism as a whole. And so I'd like to highlight, as I conclude then, how Pope Leo has addressed issues that are important within American context. The first is migration. And in his apostolic exhortation, De Lex Te, Leo says that, quote, "In every rejected migrant, it is Christ who knocks at the door of the community." Using the words of Francis, Leo describes the Catholic Church's mission to migrants as welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. And so it's within this framework that he's also, at least apparently, criticized U.S. immigration and custom enforcement policies, which he has indicated, in his view, do not respect the rights and dignity of those who have been in the country for many years. And drawing upon these values, he's also promoted what has been called a seamless garment of respect for life. And this term, as I'm sure many of you are aware, draws upon the work and thought of the late Joseph Cardinal Bernardine of Chicago, and refers to how the Catholic promotion of life extends from conception to natural death. Pope Leo's support of the poor has also impacted what he said about his home country. He has specifically criticized the accumulation of wealth by those such as Elon Musk, and encouraged legislators to promote a more equitable division of resources. And so to conclude, an emerging concern for Leo is how advances in artificial intelligence relate to peace and human dignity. And the Pope has made it clear that he's not against technological progress in and of itself, but at the same time he argues that society should be aware of how technology can diminish human responsibility and true intimacy between peoples. And so for Leo, the struggle for peace and human dignity is not just a matter of war or economic systems, but it also is a struggle that we engage in every day in our work with technology. So looking forward, I would say that, as I mentioned before, I'm somewhat surprised that Pope Leo has not been the quiet American Pope that many of us expected. Though he's measured in his comments and he's certainly not a fire breather, he has inserted himself into broader global political discussions. But he has done this not to play a politician's role, but to bring gospel issues to light that are crucially important for the world today. So I think very much contributing to or continuing in the footsteps of Pope Francis, and I also see him as a bridge between the global north and global south, and a harbinger of a real shift of gravity within the Catholic Church from the global north to the global south, where the majority of Catholics now live. Thank you for your patience. Excuse me?
What does Deluxely Day mean?
I wasn't. Oh, yeah. Good thing to know. Oh, I've loved you.
If anyone else has a question, put your hand up and I'll bring you the microphone.
Going back to India,
Yeah.
how much is there still relating to this caste system?
Well, it depends on who you ask. In my experience and the experience of people I know like Kamala, there's a lot of it.
It's still
okay? It's still there. It doesn't necessarily come out in every single aspect of life, but at times of social conflict, arguments over scarce resources, it does rear its head. So it's still very much there and very much an oppressive force. And for me, what was really important was trying to see the world through the eyes of someone like Kamala, who has to deal with this on a daily level, and it really made me much more aware of those kinds of issues, and also I would say similar issues within the United States as well.
Sort of like segregation.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. It's very much like segregation and racism. It's a complicated academic discussion, but yeah, it's really real.
I appreciate your talk very much today. And my understanding of the separation of church and state in the United States
Sure.
is not for the protection of the state, but the protection of the churches.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm thankful for, Leo, and I wish our own clergy had more courage, to speak up on gospel issues and the teachings of Jesus. It is not about involving yourselves in politics. It's about teaching the gospel, and it's teaching that to us who attend. So we have to not be afraid to preach the gospel, even if it's going to make some of the laws that are being passed unhappy.
Yeah, I think that's very well put.
And so
Thank you.
And I wish our clergy would be more brave to speak out.
I'm working on trying to be brave myself, and it's hard. So.
Wonderful talk. Thank you so much. In light of the friction between Pope Leo and the President, do you think there's a chance that Leo will come for an official visit to the States?
I don't think in the near future that's going to happen. I mean, for the 250th anniversary of the U.S., he's going to an island in Europe that's associated with immigration. So I think he's made his choice quite clear. And I think, quite honestly, it would be really politically complicated within this context if he were to come. So I can understand his reasoning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also have to say thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I'm kind of curious to better understand how much influence the Augustinian society has on the Pope, or does he make decisions on his own? Does he?
Well, I think he certainly makes decisions on his own, but I mean, he recently met with his Augustinian brothers, and so I would say it's not the Augustinian order that is shaping his decisions, but definitely an Augustinian vision and spirituality, I think, is very close to his heart, especially when it comes to issues concerning the poor. So, he's both, just as Pope Francis was very much a Jesuit in certain kinds of ways, but it wasn't as though the society was in and of itself influencing his decisions. So it's an interesting balance, I think.
Thank you so much. I too enjoyed your talk,
Thank
and
you.
I was amazed at the differences that we're facing the church in each of the continents, the differences between, Africa and the Americas and the United States.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you, do you think that by the Pope always returning to the basic truths, that is a way to a vision for a united world?
I think so. I mean, we can be really naive about this, in some ways, but I really do see the Holy Father as the conscience of the world, and he's no pope is perfect, but there are these core gospel values that the world really needs to hear. And we all as Christians really need to be aware of how we embody those values. And it's a real challenge. Being Christian's a hard thing, you know, if you really think about it. But I think Pope Leo has set out a really powerful balance between, you know, being specific when necessary, but also drawing our global attention to larger gospel principles that should guide our conduct. You know.
Thank you. Yeah, you said that you were scared too. Well, I think I can understand that.
Yeah.
I feel scared.
Yeah, I mean, Christianity really calls us to be bold and courageous in times when it's not comfortable for us to be that way. And so it's something I think about a lot, and you know, how to do that, whether it's with my family, in the community, or with my students. And it's always a challenge.
I'm dying with curiosity. Your thoughts about practicing Roman Catholics being Trump supporters and MAGA supporters?
I think that, okay, my view is that one of the saddest things facing the Catholic Church in the United States now is how polarized we are. And my sense is that, you know, I live in a family where half the side is kind of liberal, progressive Catholic, and the other half is MAGA, okay? And I think it's really, really important for us to engage each other beyond those kinds of political differences. And it's really, really hard to do because these kinds of political differences aren't just abstract kinds of things. But I guess my view is, you know, my own humble view is that within the church and within American society, we really do have to find a way to get beyond butting heads in such destructive ways. And so I don't think I'm really qualified either to comment on anyone else's Catholicity and so forth. I'm just here to, I think, reflect on my own personal experience, which I'm sure many of you share, of people you care about really, really deeply, who also disagree with you really, really deeply. And how do you work that through? And I think we all need some sort of supernatural help, called grace, in order to live through it.
So, do you believe, or I don't know if it's because of where we get our news from, and it's skewed, has he really spoken out to these other leaders of these countries that are persecuting Christians, and like we're not hearing about it because it's politicized and it's skewed in a certain way, so where we get our news from affects all that?
I think what I would say is when it comes to Catholicism, our news is skewed. And I think, and what I mean by that is not that it's necessarily skewed ideologically, is that everything is so focused through an American lens that when things happen in other parts of the church, which are as important or even more important than what happens in the American church, we simply don't hear about them. So, for example, Pope Leo has talked about the situation of Christians in Nigeria. He has addressed that specifically, but since it's not a real newsy concern for an American public, we don't hear about it. And so that's why I think talking about global Catholicism, even in the kind of superficial way that I did, is really, really important, because I think we as Americans can give ourselves a little too much importance when it comes to thinking about the Catholic Church globally, and that there's a lot for us as Americans to appreciate and to learn from Catholicism in places where it's really growing, like Africa.
Dr. Dr. Schmalz, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Okay.
Thank
well,
you for
very, very
bringing back our evening presentation as a bang. And if I can piggyback off what you're getting at, nowhere in the gospel did Jesus say this was going to be easy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But
Amen
thank you.
to that.
Thank you
Okay.
so
Thank
very,
you all
very,
for
very
being so
much.
gracious, and thank you.
And we look forward to having everyone back in June at our regular time. So we'll see you June 4th for David Gibson. Dr. Schmalz, again, thank you. Thank you to everyone. Safe home, and we'll see you in June. Have a good evening.